Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to a special episode here on True Crime and Justice TV. Yes, it is the True Crime and Justice podcast. I'm James Cousineau, coming to you from the ProPix TV studios in Vancouver, British Columbia. Today we're looking at the spider's web. Yes, the rise and fall of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. This is a special episode podcast for True Crime and Justice TV, which you can find online at truecrimeandjusticetv.com, and also airing on ProPix TV. You can find it at youtube.com/at ProPix TV. This episode is brought to you by our sponsor, Carey Movers Limited, Western Canada's favorite family-owned and operated moving company for over 20 years. You can find them online at www.careymovers.com. That's K-A-R-Y movers.com for all of your local needs for moving within Metro Vancouver and the Fraser Valley or long distance throughout Western Canada. Give Carey Movers a call or get a free quote on the website. Now, let's move on. Welcome to the True Crime and Justice TV podcast. In the annals of modern crime, few stories are as dark or disturbing as the one we're about to explore. It is a story that unfolds at the highest echelons of global society, a world of private islands, sprawling mansions, and unimaginable wealth. Yes, it is a world populated by presidents, princes, Nobel laureates, and titans of industry. But beneath this glittering facade of power and prestige lay a meticulously organized criminal enterprise, a decades-long international sex trafficking ring built on a foundation of systemic depravity and the abuse of children. At the center of this web were two figures: Jeffrey Epstein, the enigmatic financier whose nine-figure fortune was as vast as its origins were mysterious, and Ghislaine Maxwell, the British high society heiress who served as his partner, his procurer, and his chief accomplice. Yes, tonight we will unravel the story of how they built this empire of abuse. This is not just an examination of what they did, but a forensic investigation into how they did it. How did they operate in plain sight for so long, leveraging their connections to the world's elite as both a shield and as a weapon? We will trace the timeline of their crimes from their individual origins to the formation of their toxic partnership. We will expose the repeated catastrophic failures of the justice system that allowed them to continue their predation for years. And we will chart the course towards an ultimate, thorough and reckoning. Yes, we are looking at that course that they took. And of course, it will be incomplete because it's still ongoing, but we will take you up to where we are today. Yes, it is August the 8th, 2025, and this is a deep dive. Don't forget that you can be a part of the conversation if you want to call in, either through the phone lines at 778-980-4635, or if you want to call in on WhatsApp, 1-368-997-6741. You're more than welcome to call in with your opinions on this deep dive and this story. Now, let's take a look at this reckoning made possible only by the unyielding courage of women and girls they victimized. Yes, the reckoning has come. The story of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. Now, the architects of a criminal enterprise, yes, Jeffrey Epstein, from Coney Island to Wall Street. To understand a criminal, one must first understand the man. Jeffrey Edward Epstein was born January the 20th, 1953 in Brooklyn, New York. He grew up not in the rarefied air of Manhattan's elite, but in a working-class Jewish family in a private gated community within Coney Island called Seagate. His father, Seymour, was a groundskeeper for the New York City Department of Parks and Recreation, while his mother, Paula, worked as a school aide. From a young age, Epstein displayed a prodigious intellect. He excelled in mathematics and physics. He was a talented classical pianist and graduated from Lafayette High School at just 16, having skipped 2 grades. He went on to study at the prestigious Cooper Union and took classes at New York University's Courant Institute of Mathematics, but he never completed a bachelor's degree, a fact that makes his subsequent career trajectory even more remarkable. Now, in 1974, at the age of 21, and without a college degree, Epstein secured a position teaching math and physics at the Dalton School, one of Manhattan's most exclusive and elite private schools. Even then, there were troubling signs. Former students later recalled him showing inappropriate attention to underage female students, flirting with them, and even attending parties where teenagers were drinking. His tenure at Dalton was short-lived, as he was dismissed in 1976 for poor performance, is what they claimed it as. Now, for most, being fired from a prestigious teaching job would be a significant setback. But for Jeffrey Epstein, it was a launch pad. His career was not built on conventional success, but a unique ability to leverage proximity to power, even in moments of failure. While at Dalton, he had been tutoring the son of Alan Ace Greenberg, the powerful CEO of the global investment bank Bear Stearns. Despite Epstein's dismissal, Greenberg was impressed and offered him a job at the firm. It was an unorthodox entry into the high-stakes world of Wall Street, but Epstein's sharp mind and grasp of complex financial instruments allowed him to rise with meteoric speed. He started as a junior assistant to a floor trader and then within 4 years was made a limited partner, advising some of the firm's wealthiest clients. In 1981, he left Bear Stearns to found his own consulting firms, first International Assets Group, and later in 1988, the J. Epstein and Company. The nature of his business was deliberately shrouded in mystery. He claimed he worked exclusively for billionaires managing their vast fortunes, but the operations were opaque. Now, they were also often run through offshore entities in the U.S. Virgin Islands to avoid taxes and scrutiny. The secrecy was not a byproduct of his business, it was his business. By cultivating an aura of untouchable elite power, he made himself more attractive to the ultra wealthy and simultaneously discouraged examination. His only publicly identified client was Leslie Wexner, the billionaire founder of L Brands. They are, of course, the parent company of Victoria's Secret. The relationship was extraordinarily close. Wexner granted Epstein power of attorney over his trusts and foundations, an almost unheard of level of financial control. Now, this relationship became the bedrock of Epstein's immense wealth. It was through Wexner that Epstein acquired his now infamous 7-story mansion on East 71st Street in Manhattan, believed to be the largest private residence in the city. City records show that in a 2011 transfer, a company Wexner used to buy the townhouse transferred it to one of Epstein's Virgin Island-based companies for the sum of zero. Yes, apparently he gave it to him free of charge. This transaction, more than any other, suggests Epstein's service to his clients went far beyond traditional money management, hinting at a level of influence and control that remains one of the case's central unanswered questions. Now, there's Ghislaine Maxwell, the fall of a dynasty. Yes, if Jeffrey Epstein was the architect of the criminal enterprise, Ghislaine Maxwell was its essential facilitator, its public face, and its most effective weapon. Born on Christmas Day in 1961, she was the ninth and youngest child of the notorious British media tycoon Robert Maxwell. Her upbringing was one of intense and immense wealth and privilege, spent at the Headington Hill Hall, a 53-room mansion in Oxford that also housed the offices of her father's publishing empire, and that was known as Pergamon Press. Now, this gilded childhood was, according to her own lawyers in later court filings, a deeply traumatic one. They described a home life marked by profound emotional neglect and ruled by her father's domineering, narcissistic, and physically abusive personality. Robert Maxwell, a man of large physical stature, was also one with a booming voice and would reportedly subject his children to terrifying verbal tirades, reducing them to pulp. Ghislaine, said to be his favorite, was allegedly groomed from birth to serve the needs of this volatile patriarch, becoming overdependent on his approval and vulnerable to his frequent mood swings. Now, she was educated at the exclusive Marlborough College and later graduated from Balliol College in Oxford with a degree in modern history, placing her firmly within Britain's social and intellectual elite. In the 1980s, she was a prominent figure on the London social scene, founding a women's club and working for her father's various media ventures. This world did come crashing down in November of 1991. Robert Maxwell's body was found floating in the Atlantic Ocean near his yacht, the Lady Ghislaine. Named after his favorite daughter, of course. In the aftermath of his mysterious death, it was revealed that he had committed a massive fraud, plundering hundreds of millions of pounds from his company's pension funds to prop up his failing empire. The Maxwell name was ruined. The family faced public disgrace and financial collapse. It was at this moment of extreme vulnerability that Ghislaine Maxwell, stripped of her status and security, moved to New York City. There, she would meet another wealthy, powerful, and controlling man who would step directly into the psychological void left by her father. Yes, that became a partnership forged in scandal. Now, Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein met in New York shortly after her father's death. Theirs was not a simple romance, but a strategic and symbiotic merger. Epstein had amassed a fortune, but he lacked the social pedigree to access the highest echelons of global power. Maxwell, despite her family's public disgrace, possessed an inherited Rolodex with the effortless social grace of the British upper class. She was his key to a world of royalty, presidents, and of course celebrities. In return, Epstein gave her back the life of immense privilege and power she had lost. They were romantically linked in the early 1990s, and by 1992, she was managing his Palm Beach estate, becoming the lady of the house. Even after their romance ended in the early 2000s, they remained inseparable business and social partners. He provided her with a lavish financial security, transferring over $30 million to her bank accounts between 1999 and 2007 alone. Together, they constructed a powerful facade of legitimacy, a facade that was essential for their criminal enterprise to flourish in plain sight for the next 2 decades. Yes, the operation in plain sight. Let's take a look at that. The sex trafficking operation run by Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell was not a crime of opportunity. It was a calculated, systemic, and highly organized business. Systematic and highly organized business. It had clear methodology for recruitment, a sophisticated psychology playbook for grooming its victims, and a global infrastructure of properties designed to facilitate and conceal the abuse. Now, let's take a look at their Predators playbook. Yes, recruitment and grooming. At the heart of the operation was Ghislaine Maxwell. Prosecutors and victims consistently identify her as the primary recruiter. Her status as a sophisticated, charming, and well connected woman was her most potent weapon. She was able to disarm not only the young, vulnerable girls she targeted, but also their parents, creating a false sense of security that a man like Epstein could never have achieved on his own. The process they employed was a clinical form of psychological warfare, a textbook case of grooming designed to systematically dismantle a victim's sense of self, boundaries, and reality. Let's take a look at how it began. Yes, it started with a victim selection. They targeted girls from disadvantaged or unstable backgrounds, often from single parent homes with financial difficulties, who would be most susceptible to the allure of their wealth and promises. Then next came gaining access and developing the trust. Yes, Maxwell would befriend the girls, taking them shopping or to the movies, asking about their lives, their school, and their ambitions. She presented herself as a mentor, a friend, a maternal figure. This was followed by the crucial stage of desensitization. Yes, Maxwell would gradually normalize sexual topics, undress in front of the victims, and encourage them to give Epstein massages, slowly eroding their boundaries until the line between acceptable and unacceptable behavior was irrevocably blurred. Financial incentives, of course, were a key tool of control. Epstein and Maxwell would offer to pay for education, travel, or family expenses, creating a powerful sense of indebtedness that made it harder for the girls to say no. The harrowing testimonies from Maxwell's trial paint a vivid picture of this playbook in action. One victim, known as Jane, testified that Maxwell recruited her at a Michigan summer camp when she was just 14, befriending her and her mother before the abuse began. Another, named Kate, or was known as Kate, was lured to Maxwell's London home at 17 under the pretense of giving Epstein massages. She testified that Maxwell once left a schoolgirl's outfit on her bed, telling her, "I thought it would be fun for you to take Jeffrey his tea in this outfit." A third victim, Caroline, was recruited at 14 by another slightly older victim. She testified that Maxwell once groped her breasts and buttocks while she was undressed for a massage, telling her she had a great body for Mr. Epstein and his friends. The final insidious step in their operation was turning victims into recruiters. Epstein would pay his victims hundreds of dollars in cash for each new girl they brought into the fold, creating a cruel pyramid-like structure of abuse that ensured a steady supply of new targets. Now, let's take a look at the geography of the abuse. Yes, the trafficking operation was supported by a global portfolio of luxury properties, each serving a distinct and strategic purpose within the criminal infrastructure. They were not just homes, they were instruments of control, intimidation, and, of course, isolation. Let's first take a look at the Manhattan townhouse on East 71st Street. Yes, that was the operation's so-called showroom. As the largest private residence in the city, its sheer scale was designed to project immense power and overwhelm visitors. The interior was filled with bizarre and intimidating decor, rows of individually framed eyeballs, a twice life-size sculpture of a naked warrior, a stuffed black poodle perched atop a Steinway grand piano. This was a stage set for disorientation and control, and federal indictments confirm it was a primary site where dozens of girls, some as young as 14, were abused. Now let's look at the Palm Beach Mansion. Yes, in Florida, that served as a major recruitment center. Its location placed Epstein and Maxwell in the heart of high society playground, giving them access to places like Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago Club, where victims Virginia Giuffre was working as a 16-year-old spa attendant when Maxwell first approached her. The initial 2005 police investigation and subsequent infamous 2008 plea deals centered on the crimes committed within the walls of this Florida estate. It should also be mentioned that Donald Trump has recently really come out publicly to state that he was distancing himself at that time from, of course, Jeffrey Epstein, not because of his known abuse of minors, but because Jeffrey Epstein was stealing his employees from his spa. Now, whether or not there was any nefarious activity happening in the spa at the Mar-a-Lago estate is up for debate and question, but so far there has been no confirmation of any ill-doing or wrongdoing at that location. I would challenge any viewers out there that have information about that to please let us know. Finally, there was Little St. James, yes, known as Epstein Island. It's a private 72-acre island in the U.S. Virgin Islands, known locally as Pedophile Island. It was the ultimate tool of isolation and the end of the line for many victims. Girls were flown in on Epstein's private jets and helicopters, leaving them completely stranded with no means of escape and totally dependent on their captors. The U.S. Virgin Islands Attorney General later described it as a place for Epstein to hide his criminal activity from law enforcement. One 15-year-old victim reportedly became so desperate that she tried to escape by swimming away from the island. Another victim recounted being trapped in a bedroom on the island where Epstein kept a gun strapped to his bedpost. Understanding the distinct function of each location reveals a calculated business-like nature of their criminal enterprise. And then we move on to the circle of influence. Yes, the final and perhaps most crucial element of their operation was the vast globe-spanning network of the rich and powerful they cultivated. This was not just a collection of friends. It was an integral part of their operational security. The list of associates who moved through their world is staggering. Unsealed court documents and flight logs have named former presidents Bill Clinton and Donald Trump, Britain's Prince Andrew, former New Mexico Governor Bill Richardson, lawyer Alan Dershowitz, and even the acclaimed physicist Stephen Hawking. Now, it should be also noted that although these people have shown up in lists and documentation, it does not mean that they partook in any illicit activities while they're on the island or at any other point associated with Ghislaine Maxwell or with Jeffrey Epstein. Just that they did appear on the flight logs and lists that were unsealed by the courts. Now, it's critical to state that being named in these documents, as I said, is not in itself an accusation of any wrongdoing. Many were mentioned in passing, and no client list detailing criminal complicity has ever been found, a fact confirmed by a 2025 Department of Justice review. However, the sheer breadth of this network served a vital purpose. First, it acted as a lure. The promise of meeting a celebrity or a powerful politician was a powerful tool in the grooming process. Second, and more importantly, the network functioned as a passive conspiracy of silence and a shield of credibility. The constant public association with respected figures made the horrific rumors about Epstein and Maxwell seem unbelievable. It fostered a culture of see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. Yes, of course, for an outsider or even a victim to accuse Jeffrey Epstein was to, in effect, to accuse the entire elite ecosystem that validated and protected him. The social armor was their most effective defense, allowing the abuse to continue in plain sight. Now, let's take a look at Justice Denied. Yes, the 2008 Florida plea deal. For years, the rumors swirled, but in 2005, the walls of silence began to crack. The events that followed would not lead to justice. However, instead, they would result in one of the most controversial and criticized plea deals in modern American history. A deal that protected a powerful predator and his network at the direct expense of victims. Now, the first investigation in March of 2005, the mother of a 14-year-old girl walked into the Palm Beach, Florida Police Department and reported that her stepdaughter had been paid $300 for sexual activity with a wealthy man at his mansion. That man was Jeffrey Epstein. The report triggered an investigation led by Detective Joe Ricari and Police Chief Michael Ryder, who soon uncovered a pattern of abuse involving dozens of underage girls. Investigators heard graphic testimony. Girls, some as young as 14, described being recruited for massages that would escalate into sexual assault. They testified that Epstein told them to recruit their friends, saying the younger the better. Despite the overwhelming evidence, the local state attorney's office seemed reluctant to pursue the case aggressively. A grand jury returned an indictment on just a single felony count of soliciting prostitution. Dissatisfied and believing the state charges failed to address the true scope of Epstein's crimes, Chief Ryder and Detective Ricari took the extraordinary step of referring the case to the FBI. A federal investigation was opened, and by 2007, federal prosecutors had drafted a potential 53-page indictment that could have sent Epstein to prison for life. But that indictment would never be filed. Yes, it was the deal of a lifetime. Instead of facing a federal trial, Epstein's team of high-powered defense attorneys, which included Alan Dershowitz and Kenneth Starr, entered into negotiations with the Office of the U.S. Attorney for Southern District of Florida, a man named Alexander Acosta. Yes, the same Acosta you hear of today in Trump's administration. The result was a secret non-prosecution agreement, or NPA, that has since been described as the deal of a lifetime. Now, the terms of this were stunningly lenient. In exchange for the federal government dropping its entire case, Epstein would plead guilty to two lesser state charges: soliciting a prostitute and procuring a minor for prostitution. He would serve a sentence of 18 months in county jail, not a federal prison. He ended up serving less than 13 months, and for most of that time, he was granted generous work release privileges, allowing him to spend up to 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, in his private office. Now, the most shocking provision, though, of the deal was its scope. The exchange for this lenient sentence, the U.S. government agreed to grant a full immunity from all federal charges, not only to Epstein, but also to 4 named co-conspirators and, crucially, to any potential co-conspirators. This highly unusual clause effectively shut down the entire federal investigation, cauterizing any inquiry into a wider network of people who may have enabled or participated in the abuse. Now, years later, when he was serving as President Trump's Secretary of Labor, Alexander Acosta would defend his office's actions, blaming state prosecutors for their weak case and arguing that the deal, however flawed, was the only way to guarantee Epstein served any jail time at all and was forced to register as a sex offender. Now, this was seen as a betrayal of the victims. Yes, in 2008, that plea deal was more than just a failure of justice. It was a deliberate betrayal of the victims. A key component of the agreement, insisted upon by Epstein's lawyers and agreed to by Acosta's office, was that the victims would not be informed of the deal's existence or its terms until after it was finalized. This secrecy was a direct violation of the 2004 Crime Victims' Rights Act, or the CVRA, which guarantees victims the right to be consulted during plea negotiations. Attorneys for the victims, led by Bradley Edwards and Paul Castle, immediately filed a federal lawsuit in 2008 on behalf of victims named Courtney Wild. The one victim there, arguing that the government had broken the law. What followed was a grueling decade-long legal battle. In 2019, a federal judge finally agreed, ruling that prosecutors had indeed violated the CVRA. However, the victory was largely symbolic. In a subsequent, deeply divided ruling, the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals held that while the government's conduct was beyond scandalous and the prosecutors had affirmatively misled the victims, the women had no legal remedy to invalidate the deal. The court reasoned that because formal federal charges had never actually been filed, the victims' rights under the CVRA had not technically been triggered. Now, in 2008, the NPA was a masterclass in legal manipulation. It transformed the justice system from a tool for victims into a shield for a powerful perpetrator and his entire network. A perversion of its purpose that would allow Jeffrey Epstein to walk free and, as subsequent investigations would reveal, to continue his crimes for another decade. Now, let's take a look at the reckoning. Yes, for over 10 years, the secret deal held. Jeffrey Epstein rebuilt his network, traveling the world on his private jet, hosting powerful guests at his homes, and continuing to operate in the shadows. But the courage of his victims and the work of a tenacious journalist and others would not allow the story to die. A day of reckoning was coming. And that was Justice Revived. Yes, the 2019 New York indictment. In November 2018, the Miami Herald, led by investigative reporter Julie K. Brown, published a groundbreaking series titled Perversion of Justice. The series exposed the secret 2008 non-prosecution agreement in excruciating detail, sparking a firestorm of public outrage and demands for a new investigation. The pressure worked. On July the 6th, 2019, federal agents were waiting for Jeffrey Epstein as his private jet landed at Teterboro Airport in New Jersey. He was arrested. 2 days later, an indictment was unsealed in the Southern District of New York. Prosecutors in New York arguing that the Florida plea deal did not bind a different federal district charged Epstein with 1 count of sex trafficking of minors and 1 count of conspiracy to commit sex trafficking. The new indictment focused on crimes committed between 2002 and 2005 at his homes in Manhattan and Palm Beach, alleging he had sexually exploited and abused dozens of girls as young as 14. After more than a decade of impunity, it seemed Jeffrey Epstein would finally face justice in a federal courtroom. But no, then there's what's known as the death of a monster. Epstein was denied bail and held at the Metropolitan Correctional Center, a federal jail in Lower Manhattan, known for housing high-profile inmates. The facility is supposed to be one of the most secure in the country. It was not. On July the 23rd, 2019, just weeks after his arrest, Epstein was found semi-conscious in his cell with marks on his neck. It was treated as a possible suicide attempt and he was placed on suicide watch. Inexplicably, after just 6 days, psychological staff removed him from the watch and returned him to the special housing unit, also known as the SHU, where he was supposed to have a cellmate and be checked on by guards every 30 minutes. These protocols were not followed. On the night of August the 9th, 2019, Epstein's cellmate was transferred out and he was left alone, a direct violation of procedure. The two guards assigned to his unit that night, Tova Noel and Michael Thomas, later admitted to falling asleep for hours and falsifying log records to cover their negligence. At approximately 6:30 a.m. on August the 10th, 2019, Jeffrey Epstein was found unresponsive in his cell, a bedsheet tied around his neck and attached to his bunk bed. He was rushed to a nearby hospital and pronounced dead. The New York City Medical Examiner officially ruled his death a suicide by hanging. The death immediately ignited a firestorm of controversy and conspiracy theories. The sheer number of procedural failures of the jail, the removal from suicide watch, the missing cellmate, the sleeping guards, and of course, reports of malfunctioning surveillance cameras outside his cell seemed to be too egregious to be mere coincidence. A profile pathologist hired by Epstein's brother, Dr. Michael Baden, publicly disputed the medical examiner's findings, claiming the injuries were more consistent with homicidal strangulation than they were with a suicide. A subsequent investigation by the Department of Justice Inspector General found no evidence of foul play, but confirmed a cascade of negligence, misconduct, and outright job performance failures. And that was, of course, by jail staff that created the opportunity for Epstein to take his own life. The two guards, Noel and Thomas, were charged with the conspiracy and falsifying records, but in a deal with prosecutors, they avoided any jail time themselves. The catastrophic failures at the MCC created an information vacuum that made conspiracy theories inevitable. More tragically, Epstein's death permanently denied his hundreds of victims of their chance to face their primary abuser in court, ensuring that many of the secrets of his network would die with him. And then there was, of course, the trial of his accomplice. With Jeffrey Epstein dead, the pursuit of justice turned to his chief enabler. On July the 2nd, 2020, FBI agents arrested Ghislaine Maxwell at a secluded 156-acre property in New Hampshire, where she had been hiding. She was charged with a slate of federal crimes, including conspiracy and sex trafficking of a minor. Her trial began in November of 2021. Prosecutors argued that Maxwell was not merely an associate, but an indispensable predator in her own right, the wolf in sheep's clothing, who used her gender and social status to lure and groom vulnerable girls for Epstein. The prosecutor's case was built on the powerful and detailed testimony of 4 key victims who took the stand to tell their stories. They were identified by different names, of course, than their own, and it was Jane, Kate, Carolyn, and Annie Farmer. Now, they corroborated accounts of Maxwell's methods, the initial friendships, the gifts, the normalization of sex abuse, and her direct participation. That was devastating. Now, the defense attempted to portray Maxwell as a scapegoat, another victim of Epstein's manipulation, who was being unfairly blamed for his crimes now that he was dead. The jury definitely did not agree because on December the 29th, 2021, after 5 days of deliberation, Ghislaine Maxwell was found guilty on 5 of the 6 counts against her, including the most serious charge of sex trafficking of a minor. On June the 28th, 2022, she was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. At the sentencing, Judge Allison J. Nathan made it clear that Maxwell was not being punished as a proxy for Epstein, but for her own calculated role in grooming and deceiving underage victims. The verdict was a landmark moment, a legal repudiation of the specific gendered role that female traffickers play in enabling abuse. It was a direct validation of what the victims had been saying for years. Jeffrey Epstein could not have done it without her. Now, as we have heard from the voices of survivors, yes, the legal proceedings against Ghislaine Maxwell have concluded the true sentence for these crimes is not the 20 years she will serve in prison. It's the lifelong trauma carried by the survivors. At her sentencing, several victims delivered powerful impact statements that stand as the final, unassailable truth of this case. They spoke of permanent loss of trust, not just in others, but in themselves. Annie Farmer told the court one of the most painful and ongoing impacts of Maxwell and Epstein's abuse was the loss of trust in myself, my perceptions, and my instincts. They described decades of struggling with chronic anxiety, PTSD, survivor's guilt, and a profound, sickening shame. Sarah Ransom revealed that she had attempted suicide twice in the aftermath of the abuse. Their statements revealed that the abuse was not a series of isolated events, but a fundamental reprogramming of their psyches, instilling a deep seated self doubt that had affected every aspect of their adult lives. In a statement read by her attorney, Virginia Giuffre addressed Maxwell directly. For me and so many others, you opened the door to hell. This enduring pain is the ultimate legacy of their crimes. And of course, this is an unfinished story. The conviction of Ghislaine Maxwell and the death of Jeffrey Epstein bring a chapter of the story to a close, but the book remains unfinished. While the architects of sex trafficking ring have been brought to account, the vast network of enablers, associates, and potential co-conspirators remains largely untouched. The recent unsealing of court documents has publicly named many powerful people who moved in their orbit, but it has not led to any new criminal charges. The Department of Justice has stated that its review of the evidence found no basis for investigating uncharged third parties and no incriminating client list, even though there had been much speak through Trump's administration, starting way back during the election process and going back further than that, including rumors during his first term. When we then move forward to the 2024 election, of course, we heard a lot from Trump and his cronies about this list. We've heard about it since he's taken office, and then all of a sudden it just mysteriously disappeared because now there is, according to the FBI and others, no list by Jeffrey Epstein or Ghislaine Maxwell to be had. And it should also be a very big concern that she has been against the federal legal system, the jails and prisons, any policy that you look at, it is against the policies to transfer a sex offender to the minimum security facility that Ghislaine Maxwell has recently found herself transferred to. Very interesting indeed. With the rumors of Donald Trump being saturated throughout those lists. Yes, his name was allegedly everywhere. But of course, the FBI went on a firestorm of redacting documentation to ensure that Donald Trump's name was removed. And again, making all kinds of just incredibly insane accusations that it was all placed there by the Joe Biden administration. We know that Donald Trump is a scumbag, a sleazebag, a rapist, and much more. And of course, that he should be facing justice, but instead he's facing this term as president of the United States. So it's just incredible how blind and willingly complacent people can be by knowing the truth and not taking action or demanding action be taken against Donald the Scum Trump. Now, the story of Epstein and Maxwell is therefore more than just a tale of two monstrous individuals. It's a chilling indictment of a system where wealth, power, and influence can be weaponized to subvert justice, silence the vulnerable, and operate with impunity for decades. The final word belongs not to the powerful men whose names fill Epstein's black book, but to those survivors who, against all odds and in the face of unimaginable trauma, refuse to be silenced. Their courage forced a long overdue, if still incomplete, reckoning. Their voices are a permanent testament to the truth that no matter how deeply it is buried, justice can and must be pursued. Now, I have gone into great detail here about Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, and of course the charges that have been levied against them and that they are convicted of. Jeffrey Epstein, of course, did not stand trial in the fact that he also did not give the victims the opportunity to face him directly in court, and that is a shame. Now, whether or not he took his own life in that jail cell, well, we don't know, and we may never know beyond a reasonable doubt what actually happened there. For me personally, I don't believe that it was self inflicted. I think that there is a much larger power at play here, and that is my opinion on it. I do also want to just reach out to any victims out there who are watching this of abuse to reach out and speak out to get help and to make sure that you take ownership of yourself and not allow them to have the power over you or ownership of you into the future. So, again, you are worth a lot more than you give yourself credit for if you are still allowing the abuse to continue, or I shouldn't say allowing, but for a lack of other words. But again, you're not to blame, and you can reach out for help. Contact your local police department, sheriff's department, FBI, or talk to someone you trust who can reach out on your behalf and help to get you the services you need. Once again, you've been watching a special episode here into a deep dive of Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein on the True Crime and Justice TV podcast. I am James Cousineau, and remember to leave your comments down below as we do look at those and take them into consideration for mention on further episodes. You can also leave voicemails through the WhatsApp. Yes, you can send us files, comments, and phone up and leave a voicemail if you wish. Again, our country code is 1 and then area code 368, phone number 997-6741. Yes, so on WhatsApp, 1-368-997-6741 to have your voicemails brought onto the show, or just let us know if you want us to keep the voicemail private, but just to hear your message and get the information without identifying you or anyone else in the voicemail. And of course, again, you can leave comments down below. Don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe so you can be notified of more episodes as they are posted. Don't forget to also follow and subscribe to us on all of the different platforms, as we do bring regular live chat programs 4 nights a week, in addition to specials such as this on the True Crime and Justice TV platform. You can find True Crime and Justice online at www.truecrimeandjusticetv.com, and ProPix TV you can always check out at www.youtube.com/@ProPix That's PROPICS TV. Yes, you can watch any of the episodes at any time on demand through our various platforms. And once again, also, if you wish to contribute to support the channel and the reports we do, as well as to the funds that we distribute to other organizations to help in times of need, you can find that information at www.propixcanada.com. Yes, that's PROPICS Canada.com. Take care, everyone. Stay safe, and thanks again for tuning in.